I saw my own son open the door for me, and he looked right through my face like I was a ghost. That was the moment I realized my family had erased me from their memory completely. Let me take you back to the beginning, because the only way you will understand the weight of what happened next is if you first understand the depth of what I lost. My name is not important. What matters is that 5 years ago I was a different man. Back then, I had a wife named Sarah, a son named Lucas who was 8 years old with the brightest smile you have ever seen, and a house in the suburbs with a white fence that I painted every summer. I had a decent job as a logistics manager, nothing fancy, but it paid the bills and left enough for weekend trips to the beach. I thought my life was solid. I thought my family was unbreakable. I was wrong. The divorce came at me like a freight train in the dark. One day I was coming home with groceries and a bouquet of roses for no special reason, just because I loved seeing Sarah's face light up. The next day she sat me down on our couch, the same couch where we had watched hundreds of movies together, and she told me she wanted a separation. Her voice was calm, too calm, like she had practiced the words 100 times in front of the bathroom mirror. She said she loved me, but she was not in love with me anymore. She said she had met someone else. I remember my hands going cold. I remember the roses I had bought the day before sitting in a vase on the kitchen counter, their petals already starting to brown at the edges. I asked her who. She hesitated for a second, and then she told me. His name was David. He was her boss at the real estate firm where she had started working 2 years ago. David, who had come to our house for a barbecue the previous summer. David, who had held my son on his shoulders and laughed at my jokes. David, who had looked me in the eye and shaken my hand like we were friends. The betrayal did not just break my heart. It shattered my understanding of reality. I had trusted this man. I had welcomed him into my home. And all along, he had been dismantling my marriage brick by brick while I stood there like a fool, thinking everything was fine. The divorce was ugly. Sarah hired a shark of a lawyer, someone who specialized in making husbands look like villains. She claimed I was emotionally distant, that I worked too much, that I had changed after my father died. She twisted every memory we ever shared into evidence against me. The court gave her the house, primary custody of Lucas, and enough of my salary that I had to move into a tiny studio apartment with walls so thin I could hear my neighbors snoring every night. I got to see Lucas every other weekend. That was the deal. 48 hours every 2 weeks with my own son. And even those hours started to shrink because Lucas began to act strange around me. Distant. He would spend most of the visit on his tablet, barely looking up when I tried to talk to him. I found out later that Sarah and David had been telling him things about me. Little things. That I had chosen work over family. That I had not fought hard enough to keep them. That I was not someone he needed to admire. I hit bottom about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. I remember sitting in my studio apartment at 2 in the morning, staring at my reflection in a dark window. I looked like a man who had given up. My face was puffy from eating cheap fast food. My eyes were hollow. My posture was collapsed like a building that had lost its foundation. I weighed 240 pounds, most of it sadness wrapped in flesh. That night I made a decision. Not a happy decision, not an optimistic one. It was a desperate decision, the kind a man makes when he has nothing left to lose. I decided to disappear. Not literally, not in a criminal way. But I needed to become someone else, because the person I had been was dead anyway. I sold everything I owned. The furniture, the books, the old guitar I never learned to play, the wedding photos I could not bear to look at anymore. I took the money and I moved to a city 6 hours away where no one knew my name. I got a small apartment in a neighborhood that was neither good nor bad, just existing. And then I started working on myself. The weight loss did not happen overnight. It was slow, painful, and lonely. I stopped eating sugar. I stopped drinking beer. I started walking everywhere, then jogging, then running. I would run for miles through streets I did not know, past houses where strangers lived their happy lives, and I would imagine what it felt like to be them. After a year, I had lost 60 pounds. After 2 years, 80. By the time I reached my 3rd year of isolation, I had dropped 120 pounds total. I looked like a completely different person. I also grew a beard. Not a neat, trimmed beard, but a thick, wild thing that covered the lower half of my face. I let my hair grow longer than I had ever worn it. I started dressing differently too. Cheap clothes, practical clothes, the kind of outfit a working man wears when he expects to get dirty. I was not trying to hide, not exactly. I was just becoming someone who did not care about appearances anymore. Someone who had stopped trying to impress the world. The strange thing was, the more I changed on the outside, the more I started to heal on the inside. I stopped thinking about Sarah every day, then every week. Then suddenly a month would go by without her face appearing in my mind. I stopped dreaming about Lucas too, which was both a relief and a deeper wound that I did not know how to name. I told myself he was better off without me. I told myself Sarah and David could give him a better life than I ever could. I believed those lies because believing the truth would have been too painful. I got a job driving for a rideshare company. It was simple work. Pick people up, take them where they needed to go, listen to their conversations or sit in silence. I discovered I was good at it. Patience, calm, unobtrusive. People forgot I was there. They would talk on their phones, argue with their spouses, cry in my back seat, and I would just drive, saying nothing, seeing everything. After 2 years of that, I applied for a private driver position with a placement agency. Paid better, much better, and the work was more stable. The agency ran a background check, asked for references, interviewed me twice. I passed everything because I had never broken a law in my life and my driving record was spotless. They matched me with a wealthy family who needed a full-time driver for their private vehicle. The pay was generous enough that I could finally stop worrying about rent. The family's name was listed on the paperwork as the Harrisons. Mr. David Harrison, Mrs. Sarah Harrison, and their son Lucas Harrison. I did not recognize the names at first. Harrison is a common last name, and I had trained myself not to flinch every time I heard a name that reminded me of my past. I saw the address, a wealthy neighborhood on the north side of the city, and I figured this was just another rich family who needed someone to drive them around. The first day of the job, I showed up to the address in a clean black polo shirt and dark trousers. The house was enormous, 3 times the size of the suburban home I had lost in the divorce. A circular driveway, manicured hedges, a fountain in the middle that looked like something from a hotel lobby. I parked the family's luxury SUV, a black vehicle so expensive I was afraid to breathe too hard near it, and I waited by the front door. The door opened, and a boy walked out. He was about 13 years old, tall for his age, with brown hair and a familiar shape to his face. He looked at me, nodded once and said, "You the new driver?" I said, "Yes, sir," because I did not know what else to say. This boy looked like Lucas. He had the same eyes, the same curve of his jaw, the same way of tilting his head when he was studying someone. But he was older now, 5 years older, and the last time I had seen Lucas he was 8 years old and still believed in magic. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself that many boys look alike, especially when you have spent years trying to forget the face of your own child. Then a woman came out of the house. She was wearing expensive sunglasses and a white sundress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, blonder too, and she had lost some weight in a way that looked surgical rather than natural. But I knew her. I knew the way she walked, the way she held her purse against her hip, the way she looked at her phone while someone else held the door for her. It was Sarah, my Sarah, the woman who had promised to love me until death parted us. The woman who had held my hand in a hospital room when my mother died. The woman who had looked me in the eyes and told me she wanted a divorce as calmly as if she were ordering coffee. She did not recognize me. She looked at me, standing there in my polo shirt with my beard and my longer hair and my thinner body, and she saw nothing familiar. No flicker of recognition. No pause of confusion. She just said, "You're the driver? We're running late. Let's go." Then a man came out behind her. David. He looked older now, heavier in the face, with gray streaks in his hair that had not been there 5 years ago. He was on his phone, talking loudly about an investment deal, and he did not even glance in my direction. He just walked past me toward the SUV like I was a piece of furniture. I opened the doors for them. I helped load their bags. I got behind the wheel and started the engine. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, which surprised me because inside my chest my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might crack a rib. They did not recognize me. None of them. My own ex-wife, the man who stole my family, and my own son looked at me and saw a stranger. I had changed so completely that I had become invisible to the people who had once known me better than anyone. We drove for about 20 minutes in silence. I took them toward the city center, where David had a business meeting and Sarah planned to do some shopping. Lucas sat in the back seat behind me, scrolling through his phone, and every time I glanced in the rearview mirror I felt a punch of grief and anger and something else I could not name. That was my son. That was my blood. And he had no idea. Then David got off his phone and said something that made my blood run cold. "Did you talk to the lawyer about the trust fund?" Sarah sighed. "I told you, David, it's locked until Lucas turns 18. There's nothing we can do until then. We need that money now," David said. His voice had an edge to it, a tightness I had not heard before. "The investment property in Florida is bleeding us dry. If we don't make the payment by the end of the quarter, we lose the deposit, and that's $500,000 gone." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The trust fund was meant for Lucas's education. It came from his father's side. We can't just take it." I felt my hands tighten on the steering wheel. The trust fund. My mother had set up a trust fund for Lucas before she died. She had put a significant amount of money into it, money that was supposed to pay for his college, his first car, his future. I had completely forgotten about it in the chaos of the divorce. The lawyers had never mentioned it. I had assumed it was safe, untouchable, protected. "His father sighed," David said, and he laughed. It was an ugly laugh, dismissive and cruel. "His father is a nobody. You said it yourself, Sarah." The man disappeared. He stopped fighting for visitation. He stopped calling. He's probably living in some gutter somewhere, drinking himself to death. Why should his family's money sit in a bank account for 4 more years when we need it now? Sarah did not defend me. She did not say that I had not disappeared, that I had simply stopped being able to afford a lawyer, that the court system had crushed me until I had nothing left to fight with. She just said, "We'll figure something out. Just don't talk about this in front of Lucas." But Lucas was listening. I could see his reflection in the rearview mirror. His head was tilted slightly, his eyes fixed on the back of his mother's seat. He was pretending to look at his phone, but his thumbs were not moving. He heard everything. I drove in silence for the rest of the trip. I dropped David at his office, then Sarah at a shopping center, and finally Lucas at a private school that looked more like a corporate campus than a place where children learned. Lucas got out of the SUV without saying thank you. He just closed the door and walked away, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his head down. I sat in the parking lot for a long time after he disappeared inside. My mind was racing. I had spent 5 years trying to forget my past, trying to become a new person who did not carry the weight of betrayal. And now, in the span of a single morning, that past had climbed into my car and revealed a secret that changed everything. They needed money. David's business was failing. The beautiful house, the luxury SUV, the expensive clothes, it was all built on a foundation of debt and desperation. And they were planning to steal my son's trust fund to save themselves. I could not let that happen. Not because I wanted revenge, not at first anyway. I wanted to protect Lucas. He was the one innocent person in this entire mess. He was 13 years old, caught between adults who saw him as either a burden or a resource, and he deserved better than all of them. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Sarah had left me for David because she thought he could give her a better life. She had painted me as the villain, taken my son, taken my home, taken my dignity. And now, 5 years later, the man she had chosen was about to steal the only inheritance my son had from my side of the family. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. I decided right there in that parking lot that I was not going to walk away this time. I had walked away from my marriage, my home, my son. I had let them erase me, but I was not going to let them erase Lucas's future. I went home that night and started making calls. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in trust funds and estate law. I explained the situation without revealing my identity at first. The lawyer told me that a trust fund established by a grandparent was generally protected from parents, even from court orders unless certain conditions were met. The only way David and Sarah could access that money early was if they could prove it was in Lucas's best interest. And given that David's business was failing, it would be very hard to argue that sinking his son's inheritance into a bad investment was in anyone's best interest except his own. But there was a catch. The trust fund was managed by a bank that had been instructed to follow the directions of Lucas's legal guardians. Sarah, as his mother, had significant influence over how the money was handled. She could not withdraw it outright, but she could authorize loans against it. She could move it into investment accounts that she controlled. She could slowly bleed it dry over time, and by the time Lucas turned 18, there might be nothing left. I needed proof. I needed to catch them in the act of trying to steal the money, and I needed to do it without them knowing who I was. The next day, I showed up for work as usual. I picked up Lucas first, then Sarah, then David. I drove them to their various destinations. I said nothing. I just listened, and they talked. They talked constantly, as if I were not there, as if I were just another part of the car like the air conditioning or the leather seats. I learned that David's business problems were worse than I had imagined. He had borrowed money from dangerous people, not criminals exactly, but investors who expected returns and who did not take excuses. I learned that Sarah was unhappy, though she tried to hide it. She made comments about David being stressed, about him working too much, about him snapping at Lucas for no reason. I learned that Lucas was struggling in school, that he had no close friends, that he spent most of his time alone in his room playing video games. I also learned that they had already started moving money. Sarah mentioned a meeting with a financial advisor who had found a loophole that would allow them to access the trust fund without triggering any alarms. The loophole involved transferring the money into a new account that Sarah controlled, then using that account to invest in David's business. If the business failed, the money would be gone, and there would be no paper trail leading back to the trust fund. They planned to do it in 3 weeks. I had 3 weeks to stop them. I started documenting everything. I bought a small voice recorder and kept it in my pocket during every shift. I recorded their conversations, the dates, the times, the specific plans they discussed. I took notes on everything I heard. I built a file that grew thicker every day. But I knew that a voice recording of 2 people talking in a car might not be enough to convince a judge. I needed something more. I needed someone on the inside. That is when I made a decision that terrified me. I decided to talk to Lucas, not as his father. Not yet. I was not ready for that conversation, and honestly, I was not sure he would believe me even if I told him the truth. But I could talk to him as the driver. I could ask questions. I could plant seeds. The opportunity came on a Friday afternoon. I was picking Lucas up from school, and Sarah had texted me saying she would be late. She told me to take Lucas home and wait for her there. That gave me 20 minutes alone with my son. Lucas got in the back seat and put his headphones on immediately, like he always did. I drove slowly, watching him in the rearview mirror. His face looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes that no 13-year-old should have. I reached over and tapped the button that turned off the music playing through the car speakers. Lucas looked up, annoyed. "Hey," he said. "What are you doing?" "Sorry," I said. "I just wanted to ask you something." He pulled one headphone off his ear. "What? Do you ever think about your real dad?" The question hung in the air between us. Lucas stared at me for a long moment, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion to something I could not read. "Why do you care?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "I guess I hear a lot of things driving people around. Families, you know. Sometimes kids say they wish their parents understood them better." Lucas looked out the window. "My real dad left," he said. "When I was 8. He just stopped coming to see me. My mom says he didn't love us enough to stay." Those words cut me deeper than anything Sarah had ever said. But I kept my voice steady. "Do you believe that?" I asked. Lucas was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said, "I don't know. I was 8. I don't remember much. My mom and David say he was a loser, but sometimes I think maybe they just want me to think that." He turned back to look at me, really look at me, for the first time since I had started this job. His eyes searched my face, and I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, somehow, he could see through the beard and the weight loss and the years of separation. "You kind of look like him," Lucas said quietly. My heart stopped. "What?" "I don't know. There's something about your eyes. Or maybe I'm just imagining it. My mom says I have a crazy imagination." I pulled the car over to the side of the road. Lucas looked alarmed. "Why are we stopping?" I turned off the engine. I turned in my seat to face him directly. This was the moment. The point of no return. I could stay silent and let David and Sarah steal my son's future. Or I could tell the truth and hope that Lucas was strong enough to handle it. "Lucas," I said, "my name is not the name the agency gave you. My real name is Mark. I used to live in a house with a white fence. I used to paint that fence every summer because I thought it made the house look happy. And I used to have a son named Lucas who had the brightest smile I have ever seen." Lucas's face went pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "I am your father," I said. "And I never stopped loving you. I never chose to leave. Your mother and David made sure I couldn't see you anymore. They took everything from me. And now they are trying to take something else. They are trying to steal the money your grandmother left for you. The money that was supposed to be your future." Lucas stared at me. His eyes were wide, unblinking. I watched as the shock slowly transformed into something else. Something I recognized because I had felt it myself years ago on the day my own world collapsed. Anger. "I knew it," Lucas whispered. "I knew something was wrong. They never talk about you. Every time I ask, they change the subject. David gets angry. Mom gets sad. I knew they were hiding something." He looked down at his hands, then back up at me. "What do we do?" he asked. That was the moment I knew I had my son back. Over the next 2 weeks, Lucas and I worked together. He started paying attention to everything his mother and David said at home. He looked through their papers when they were out. He found emails, bank statements, legal documents. He took photos of everything and sent them to me. I was no longer just the driver. I was his father and he was my son, and together we were going to expose the people who had tried to destroy us both. The plan came together slowly. I met with my lawyer and laid out everything we had. The voice recordings, the photos, Lucas's testimony. The lawyer said we had enough to file a restraining order against the trust fund, enough to freeze the account before David and Sarah could touch it. But that would only stop them. It would not expose them. It would not give me justice for everything they had taken from me. I wanted more. I wanted everyone to know what they had done. So I decided to wait. I let them get closer to their deadline. I let them think they were going to get away with it. And then, on the day they had scheduled to transfer the money, I made my move. The morning of the transfer, I picked them up as usual. David was in a good mood, almost giddy. He talked about how everything was finally falling into place. Sarah was quieter, but she smiled when David kissed her cheek. Lucas sat in the back seat, and I saw him catch my eye in the rearview mirror. He gave me a small nod. I did not drive to David's office. Instead, I drove to the bank where the trust fund was held. David noticed the change in route after a few minutes. "Where are you going?" he asked. "This isn't the way to my office." "I'm taking a detour," I said. "You can't just change the route without asking," Sarah said, her voice sharp. "We have appointments." I pulled into the bank's parking lot and stopped in front of the main entrance. A group of people were waiting there. My lawyer, a court reporter, and 2 police officers. David looked at them, then at me. His face started to change, the confidence draining away. "What is this?" he demanded. I got out of the SUV. I walked around to the back door and opened it for Lucas. He got out and stood beside me. Then I turned to face David and Sarah, who were still sitting in the back seat, frozen. "David Harrison," I said. "Sarah Harrison. You are both being served with a restraining order regarding the trust fund of Lucas Mark Harrison. Additionally, you are being investigated for attempted fraud, embezzlement, and financial abuse of a minor." David's face turned red. "Who do you think you are? You're just the driver. You don't have the authority to do any of this." I reached up and ran my hand through my beard. Then I looked directly at Sarah, who had gone very still, her eyes wide with dawning horror. "I'm not just the driver," I said. "Sarah, look at me. Really look at me. You knew me once. You promised to love me forever. And then you threw me away like garbage." Sarah's hand went to her mouth. "No," she whispered. "It can't be." "It is," I said. "I'm Mark, Lucas's father. The man you left for a business deal that's about to destroy everything you've built." David started shouting. He said I was lying, that this was harassment, that he would have me arrested. But the police officers were already walking toward the SUV. They opened the doors and asked David and Sarah to step out of the vehicle. The scene that followed was chaos. David screaming about his rights. Sarah crying, begging, trying to explain. Lucas standing beside me, his small body pressed against my side, watching as the people who had raised him for the past 5 years were led away. But here is the part of the story that matters most. The part one did not expect. When the officers searched David's briefcase, they found documents that went far beyond the trust fund scheme. They found evidence of money laundering, tax evasion, and fraud that stretched back years. David had been running an illegal operation out of his real estate firm, using investors' money to fund his lifestyle while cooking the books to hide the losses. Sarah had known about it. She had helped him. She had signed documents she knew were false. The trust fund was just the tip of the iceberg. David was looking at serious prison time. Sarah too, though her involvement was less extensive. And the house, the cars, the vacations, all of it had been built on a foundation of lies and stolen money. Within a week, the bank accounts were frozen. Within a month, David was arrested. Within 2 months, Sarah agreed to a plea deal that gave her a reduced sentence in exchange for testifying against him. And Lucas? Lucas came to live with me, not in my small apartment, but in a new place we found together. A modest house with a small yard and a kitchen big enough for 2 people to cook in at the same time. It was not the house with the white fence. It was something better. It was ours. The first night Lucas slept in his new room, he came downstairs at 2 in the morning. I was sitting on the couch, unable to sleep, just staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything that had happened. He sat down next to me. He was 13 years old, almost a man, but in that moment he looked like the 8-year-old I had lost. "Dad?" he said. I turned to look at him. It was the first time he had called me that in 5 years. "Yeah, buddy?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm glad you didn't give up." I put my arm around him, and for the first time in 5 years I cried. Not sad tears. Not angry tears. They were the tears of a man who had lost everything and then, against all odds, found the one thing that truly mattered. My son. The money, the trust fund is still there, untouched, waiting for Lucas to turn 18. David is serving a 7-year sentence in a federal prison. Sarah is serving 18 months in a minimum security facility, after which she will be on probation for 3 years. She has asked to see Lucas twice. He has said no both times. As for me, I am no longer a driver. I opened a small business, a garage specializing in classic car restoration. It does not make me rich, but it makes me happy. And every day when I close up the shop and go home to the house where Lucas is doing his homework or playing video games or just sitting on the couch watching TV, I remember the lesson that 5 years of pain taught me. Sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all. Sometimes the best revenge is survival. It is becoming someone your enemies would never recognize, not because you are hiding, but because you have grown beyond anything they could ever understand. David and Sarah looked at me and saw a driver, a nobody, a man who did not matter. And because they did not see me, they spoke freely. They revealed their secrets. They handed me the weapon I needed to destroy everything they had built. They hired me as their driver without recognizing me. And by the time they figured out who I was, it was already too late. Sometimes karma does not need to shout. Sometimes it just needs to sit quietly in the front seat, listen to everything you say, and wait for the perfect moment to pull over and change everything. My name is Mark. I am Lucas's father, and this is the story of how I got my life back.